looking for? What's the age-old question that I'm looking for? I'll give you a hint. You can look at the front page, and you might understand which age-old question I'm referring to.
Because if we have brains, then we're programmed to do the right thing.
Why do we need the Torah? Okay, it's part of it. Good morning, Joan and Susie. I hope you can hear us well.
Yeah, good morning. Rabbi, before you start, I have a question about Maimonides and him saying he's a doctor. What kind of education did they have in those days to become a physician?
Better education than we have today.
What does that mean?
I don't know. You can look in the old ancient texts and you'll see what I don't know. They definitely had some form of surgery. They definitely had some form of medicines that they used. I don't know. I definitely know that they were not using microscopes and robotic arms for surgery.
Yeah. Well, did they have? Well, I don't know if they had a school. I doubt it. I just didn't know if he just declared.
Probably they do. Not everyone 1,000 years ago was living in a cave.
Yeah. Well, no, but
if you think about all the great philosophers, do we have philosophers today of the scope and what's the word I'm looking for, Zaman? The magnitude, the level of philosophers that lived 1,500, 2,000 years ago? Not as many.
Not well. Currently living in the past 60 years, I can
a few. But when we think of the schools of philosophy in those days were bulging at the seams. So to think that we're the only people who exist who have brains is rather a short-sighted view of the world. If we think about history and we think about the buildings that they built, I mean, you travel to Europe and you see these that are 600, 800 years old, and you just stand in front of them and you realize that we don't take up so much space and we're not so important. There were many people who lived before us and many people who will live after us to maybe greater than us. And to think that yes, we live in a beautiful time, and yes, we live in a relatively peaceful time, but our parents and our grandparents, our great grandparents and our great ancestors were incredible people. There's a story that I've said many times, and I'll finish this part of the conversation with this story. There was a guy, and he's on a plane. There's an atheist, and he's next to a rabbi, and he sees that the rabbi's children and grandchildren are constantly coming back to him and asking him, can I get you some peanuts? Can I get you a drink? Do you need anything? And the atheist looks at the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I don't understand. My kids, they barely talk to me. And if I ask them, maybe they will help me with something. And your grandkids keep running over and asking, can they get you this? Can they make you comfortable? The rabbi says it's very simple. To my grandchildren, I'm 2 generations closer to God. To your grandchildren, you're 2 generations closer to the apes. Let's begin. If you already said your morning prayers, then you said the blessing over learning Torah, and so you don't need to recite it again. If not, we will recite the blessing that we recite before we learn Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah. Today we're going to ask the age-old question, which is, can you have morals without God?
Yep.
So many people want to say yes. And Mordechai David says no. We all think that we have very clear morals and ethos, if that's the correct terminology to use over here. However, there are always gray areas. For example, is it okay to kill? Or to make someone die? I don't think there's kill and murder. Is it okay to make someone die?
Euthanasia?
I'm not talking about euthanasia, but that's a great point to bring up. We'll get there in a minute. Is it okay to make someone die?
Well, you sort of recognize self-defense.
I didn't ask Judaism, because that's already gone. I'm talking about your personal view of the world.
No. Well, I think most would recognize self-defense.
Okay, so Zalman says it's not okay to make someone die. And Chaim says, well, what if they're trying to kill you?
Except for certain circumstances.
Okay, so we can all agree that killing people is bad, except in certain circumstances. Now, who determines what those certain circumstances are? I'm going to run all the way to the other direction over here. Well, not all the way, but far in the other direction. Do you have a moral obligation to stop someone from self-harming or killing themselves?
Oh, Deuteronomy also says there's a time for war.
There's a time for war. So that's back to Judaism.
Back to Judaism.
That's back to religion.
Rationale for morals without reason.
Go ahead.
With morals without God.
Yes.
Everyone has the same desire. Assuming everyone wants to live in peace and be prosperous.
Correct.
Therefore, we enter into a social contract that guarantees everybody has the ability to do so. In order to enforce that social contract, we make laws. The laws are basically rules. Don't do unto others
what you don't want.
You.
Correct.
Not because of God, but because it is the formula for living amongst other people.
So on the one hand, I agree, and in a theoretical world that is brilliant and beautiful. But let's take a simple example, and we're not going to get into the politics or anyone's personal view over here. We're going to look at it from a bird's eye view, which is, okay, if everybody wants to live peacefully, then should we allow people to have guns? And over here, everything splits very far apart. You have one people who say, the only way to allow people to live in peace and freedom is to grant them the right to protect themselves. And you have other people who say, well, then we're not living in peace and freedom if everybody's running around with guns.
Okay, but that's not a question of morality. That's a question of policy, how to achieve a particular goal of everyone living in peace and prosperity. That is the overriding rule.
Okay, good.
And then you can argue about how to achieve that.
Okay.
Such as whether or not to allow guns.
Fair enough. You're right. I was wrong with that. It was a bad example. Let's think of who can help us with a good example. Exactly. Exactly. So you know this better than me, and you've been through this better than me. Yeah. But what happens when my version of peace and tranquility clashes with your version of peace and tranquility? Whose rights to peace and tranquility trumps the other? For example, I believe that my right to peace and tranquility includes myself building a house. You believe that your right to peace and tranquility is the ability to walk in the woods behind your house. To walk in the woods behind your house. Am I allowed to cut down those trees to make myself a house? Is that now a moral question?
Whose property are the trees on?
How do we determine who has property at all?
Yeah, that form government, and government create the rules.
So we push it out to the government, and the government makes the rules, which means that the government determines most of what our morals and ethics are going to be based on.
Our behavior, not morals and ethics, what our behaviors are in order to achieve social harmony for the greatest number of people.
Okay. So in a general sense, that sounds wonderful. Let's talk practically about a suicide, do you have to stop someone from killing themselves?
100%.
Laura says 100%. If you see someone who's about to kill themselves, there's something wrong, and preservation of life, even if the person does not want to preserve their own life.
Especially today, since we most rabbinic authorities agree with the fact that.
We're getting religious over here. Have to keep religion out of it for now.
Okay, but even most scientists, most doctors and scientists, know that a person who wants to kill himself has something.
There's something unbalanced somewhere in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How about, the identity of the person who's seeking to commit suicide? If we could have burst into Hitler's room and stopped him at the last minute from blowing his brains out, should we have done that?
Should we have stopped them from
Should
killing
we have stopped him from killing
himself?
himself?
But what about someone who's 98
that's
years
a
old?
whole question. Could travel back in time to when Hitler was a little baby.
Well, now we're talking.
Should you kill him?
No,
He's talking if you could travel back in time to when Hitler was a grown man and was about to be captured. If they would have been, should they have figured out a way to
Well,
stop
we're
him?
talking about the moment he was about to commit suicide.
Well, here's another question. What happens if this person is 98 years old and has been suffering for 5 years and just wants to end it peacefully? Does that change the story?
Has to do with a person who is a person psychologically ill, like if they're very depressed.
No, they're
But if a person that would consider that person would be considered incompetent to make their own decision. However,
someone who's
a 90
competent. Let's say someone who, you're saying a 98 who is
year-old
competent.
once is suffering is not incompetent, you make a very rational decision.
Okay, so at what point do we
As
say
opposed
that
to-
life is not
As opposed
so
to a 15-year-old girl whose heart is broken and wants to kill herself.
right?
It was not making.
And who determines how rational and how in the right state of mind this person is?
People educated in psychology and psychiatry.
Okay, so we trust the professionals and hope that they make the right decision. What about like when it comes to war? How do we determine whether it's okay to start a war or not?
Again, a lot of the people want to live in society. So if you're attacked,
What if you're not yet attacked?
well,
If you're the aggressor?
Not if you're the aggressor, but you see that your enemies are ramping things up.
well, okay, that's a preemptive war.
Right.
Yeah.
Preemptive strike, the
Right.
6-Day War.
6-Day War. Yeah.
6-Day War is a great example of this.
Yeah.
Was the 6-Day War justified?
Well, actually, it wasn't a preemptive strike because the Queen of Egypt closed the Gulf of Aqaba. That itself
Was an act of war.
That's
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a much better question now. Maybe I shouldn't ask this one. They say I'm going against all the rules now.
Although its
They say-
effect was not immediately felt, and they could have reversed themselves the next
It
day
was
or the next week.
legally, under international
Yes,
law,
yes.
it was an act of war.
Yes.
Therefore, the war had already started.
Right. Because it was an international war.
Right.
Before I break all the rules, you remind me of we have to start with a joke. So, there's these 3 guys, an Israeli, a Brit, and a French man, and they're all captured by pirates, cannibals, and they're about to be.
Didn't I tell you this joke?
Could be. It's an old joke from many years ago. Everyone probably heard it. It could be. You want to
Go
say
ahead.
it?
Would
you like to?
go ahead?
And they are captured by pirates, and the pirates are gonna kill them all. And he says, each one you can have your last wish. So the French guy says, let me have my last French onion soup before you kill me with a baguette. Okay, fine. He has his baguette. He takes it, starts warming up his soup. The Englishman says, well, he wants a warm beer and some fish and chips. Okay, they start getting him his stuff prepared. And they ask the Israeli, what do you want? And he says, I want you to kick me in my pants. I said, kick you in your pants? Are you out of your mind? What kind of a goodbye present is that? I said, go ahead. Fine. They kick him in his pants. He pulls out an Uzi. He kills all the pirates and saves everyone. The Brit and the Frenchman, I say to him, what, are you out of your mind? Who said they were going to give us one last prayer, one last wish? Yeah, we could have all died. Why didn't you pull that gun out earlier to save us? And he said, well, then you would have said I started. So here I want to. It's very hard. Like I said, I'm breaking all the rules. You say you should never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. You shouldn't get involved in emotionally charged conversations. I want to see if we can look at this from a intellectual standpoint. So instead of talking about Gaza and Lebanon, I'm going to talk about Beirut and Damascus. In the 6 Day War and in the Yom Kippur War. Beirut was in the 6 Day War when they got or Damascus, where they reached to Damascus, almost until Damascus. They didn't capture it, but they got there. Was it Beirut or Damascus?
No. Sharon actually, when he was defense minister, the IDF went all the way into Beirut.
It was into Beirut.
Yeah, I think it was after the Shaba Shatila refugee camp incident and
the 6 Day War.
But they were very close.
In the 6 Day War, where did they go?
They were at least in the outer suburbs.
Yeah.
In the 6 Day War, where did they reach until? In the north.
The Golan Heights.
They went further. They pushed back the enemy forces.
Oh, they came within what,
70 miles, 60 miles
60 miles of Damascus.
Of Damascus. Okay.
Yeah.
The Israelis reached within 60 miles of Damascus. Should they have conquered the city and taken the country as theirs?
Yeah, at that point there was they could have. There was no real.
They could have, but should they have?
That's a military or political decision calculation.
Okay, but who's determining the morals? We're talking about the morals of the people who are making these decisions. Because it could have been you. If you would have gone to the right colleges and made the right...
I'm not.
So let's look at the two sides for a minute.
I'm not cognizant of all the political and military implications that were.
But we're lay leaders. We're not stupid people. We can think a little bit, right? So on the one hand, would more people have died in that war had they gone into Damascus?
Probably.
Probably more of the enemy would have died if they would have gone into Damascus. Possibly some of our soldiers as well. Not very likely, being the way that the war had gone. But there definitely would have been enemy casualties. Okay. But in the bigger picture, had they taken over Damascus, taken control over the country, would they have a right to do that?
Why? Because Syria didn't start the war.
Yeah, I mean, legally they would have had the right.
Legally, they would have. You came to me. I won. That's fair and fair and square, right?
You do the crime, you do the time.
Right.
If you're going to be the aggressor and you
Okay.
lose.
Now, what about the rest of history? Would history have changed had Israel taken control of Damascus? Would we have the same threat level that we have today?
For that matter, in the 6 Day War, the IDF didn't have to
That's-
stop
that's-
in Jordan. They could have gone on the way to Amman.
That's a possible thing. It's greater. Who knows? That might have been greater, but we don't know how Russia would have acted. We don't know what the United States position would have been. I mean, if they've gone, who knows? They have led to a greater regional war.
Okay, I hear you. What would have happened if they would have taken control of Damascus to show everyone who's boss, and then say, listen, we're going to let you have your country, but we're going to keep the strategic military spots like the mountains, the mountain region right north of the Golan Heights, etc., which today are a horrible mess for Israel.
Israel still has.
But I'm saying north of the Golan Heights, there's a huge mess and a lot of strategic military positions. Or if they would have said to Egypt, I'm sorry, but we're not giving the oil in the Sinai Desert because you broke the treaty 5 times. Or however many times, I don't remember how many times, right? So the point that I'm bringing out is that while we all have very clear and ethics and morals, and we do, and for most of our lives, we can walk around believing that, not believing, but acting in a way that is clearly guided by morals, clearly to everyone. Oh, goodness, I went. God forgive me, please. There are gray areas. And when you get to those gray areas, it's very easy for us to sway those boundaries based on our particular, I'm not going to use the word agenda, but our view of life as well as the objectives that we're trying to achieve, accomplish.
Like war and politics, so morality never enters into it. The decision by the government is always going to be for political and military advantages and disadvantages. And
I like what you said with the words politically and military, because
governments don't do what's
Israel
moral.
likes to call themselves the most moral army in the world. The problem is that who is determining what the morals are? It doesn't seem like, first of all, it doesn't seem like the rest of the world could care for Israel's morals, and it doesn't seem that they're necessarily taking their morals from the Torah. And I think that a key word that you used is political and military. Wars, and we've spoken about this many times before, especially with everything that's going on in Israel, October 7, and the attitude towards war. Military decisions should never be made by politicians. Military decisions should be only made not in terms of strategy and in terms of fulfilling the objectives.
I would say political decisions should not be made by the military, which has been Israel's problem since its founding. The generals retire and they go into politics.
There's always the saying that war is too important to be left to generals. War, or the other old saying, is that war is politics by another.
So I was clear. I was clear about. I guess I didn't understand what your point. The decision to go to war or not, or what the objective should be, that I understand politically can be, but in terms of achieving those objectives, when you worried about what other people will say and what it will look like,
well, even that
you have a big issue when you leave that to politicians.
Like, I mean, for example, you know, there was a decision to drop the atomic bomb, right? That was a political decision. So where to drop it? Some people suggested drop it on the city of Kyoto, which was the ancient Japanese capital. And Secretary of War, who happens to have honeymoon in Kyoto,
Who happens to have?
Who happened to have honeymoon in Kyoto, said, no, very beautiful ancient city, we cannot drop the bomb there.
Marshall.
Yeah.
Okay, I stand corrected.
And there was
See, I broke the rules.
And for
we
exa-
do
and
the
there
crime,
was-
we do the time. I
and there
broke the
was
rules,
another
and I got schooled
and there
today.
was another incident in Italy. Germans were holed up in this ancient monastery, and the Allies were saying, "Attack the monastery, destroyed, but it's an ancient, beautiful monastery." And eventually, some Catholic leader says, "Okay, do what you have to do."
That's a moral question, isn't it?
Hmm?
That's a moral question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a moral question, but it's also a political question.
Right.
Yeah, are we going to destroy this beautiful ancient?
Right. Okay. In this week's Torah portion comes off of last week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion, as we discussed, we read the Ten Commandments. This week's Torah portion begins, and these are the laws that you should place before them. In Judaism, we have 3 categories of laws. I'm going to go a little faster in the inside, but I think we did a lot of good conversation here. These are the laws that you should place before them. There are 3 categories of laws in Jewish literature. There are the laws that are civil laws, which had we not gotten the Torah, we would have figured them out on our own. Then we have what are called the the testimonial laws, for lack of a better word. Well, commemorative is a better word. The commemorative laws, for example, Passover, Shabbat, Sukkot, which we wouldn't have come up to do on our own, but they make a lot of sense, right? God rested on the seventh day, and to remember that God created the world, He wants us to rest on the seventh day as well. God took us out of Egypt, and He wants us to remember that, and so we celebrate July 4th, etc., etc. I was mixing two things there, right? And most importantly, Cinco de Mayo. Nobody laughed. Okay. And then there's a third group of categories, which are statutes, they're called. The statutes are laws which make absolutely no sense. For example, mixing wool and linen. You're not allowed to mix wool and linen. Why? Makes no sense. The laws of kosher. Why do you have to keep kosher? Makes no sense. The law of purity and impurity makes no logical sense. But this is what God decided that He wants us to do and how He wants us to follow, and therefore we must. So, after going through a myriad of laws of nitty-gritty, and the kind of laws which are simple laws that we could have figured out on our own, the law of roadside assistance, the law of returning something to somebody if they lose it, the laws pertaining to the slaves, that you have to treat them with respect, which apparently, even though it's in the category of stuff we would have figured out on our own throughout history, those who did not look to the Torah for their ideals did not seem to come up with that part of common sense. As Zalman likes to say, common sense is not so common and not so sensible. And then after all these laws, the Torah goes on back to the story of what happened at the giving of the Torah, that God wanted to come to the Jewish people, and He asked them if they want the Torah, and we said, whatever God wants, we will do, and then after that, we will try to understand. So, why does the Torah interject with all of these laws, and then go back to a discussion of, we will do, and we will listen about what happened by the giving of the Ten Commandments? So, if we look at source number 4 on page number 2, we will see to Moses, he said, this is the beginning of the discussion after we learn about all these laws, about 100 or so mitzvahs, 60 mitzvahs, 70 mitzvahs, I don't remember. A lot of mitzvahs for one portion. And we see over here, Rashi, to Moses, he said, ascend to the Lord. And Rashi picks up on this question that everybody would have. We spoke already about the Ten Commandments last week, and here you're giving us all these new laws, which were taught to Moses, of course, afterwards. So why now is the Torah telling us that God told Moses to ascend up the mountain? I thought we already got the Ten Commandments last week. Chaim Goldstein, would you like to read for us source number 4 from Rashi on page number 2? Page number 1, page number 2, source number 4, over here. To Moses, he said, so Rashi is answering the question, why are we talking now about the Ten Commandments? This was it.
This was said before the Ten Commandments on the 4th of Nisan, Moses told to ascend.
Thank you very much. So, this was told before all of these laws. We're going back in history. Here comes a very important point, which is a very central focal point rule, a very important rule. When it comes to the Torah, not everything is in chronological order. And therefore Rashi is saying, don't be so confused. Yes, it seems like Moses is going back up the mountain a second time. No, there is no chronological order in the Torah, and this was said before all these extra commandments were given. The question now becomes, why does the Torah go out of order? Why does the Torah teach us about the Ten Commandments, then give us a whole list of laws that were taught to Moses after he came down the mountain, after he came down and told us all these laws, and then go back to discussing the giving of the Ten Commandments? What's the purpose and what's the message for us? Let's look on page number 4 where it says Moses commands the laws. Most of the rest of it we already went through outside. Page number 4, Moses commands the laws. Concerning this, it is said to Moses, these are the laws that you shall place before them. Meaning, even though these are commandments that human reason itself obligates, Moses still had to command them to the Jewish people in the name of God. This is especially evident in light of what is explained in the Medrash, which Rashi cites in his commentary on the Torah. Wherever the term "and these" is used, it comes to add to what came before us. Just as the earlier ones, the 10 Commandments in last week's Torah portion, were given at Sinai, so too the laws in this week's Torah portion were given at Sinai as well. At first glance, this seems contradictory. After all, if something was given at Sinai, then it makes no difference whether it is a decree or a law. Everything given at Sinai must be observed. On the other hand, if a law is obligated by human reason, then why is there any need for a command from Sinai at all? As the Talmud states in Tractate Eruvin, if the Torah had not been given, we would have learned proper conduct even from the animals. Yet even the laws that reason itself obligates are stated in the Torah as having been given at Sinai. There is nothing superfluous in the Torah, just as nothing is missing from it, nothing extra was added to it. There is a general principle that God did not create anything in the world in vain, and this is all the more clear regarding the Torah itself. Page 5. Since there can't be anything superfluous, it must be the case that we cannot rely on the obligation imposed by reason. It must be that the command in the Torah adds something new and fundamental, even to matters that are already required by human reason. So the question is twofold. On the one hand, why are there differences between the categories of laws? Why do we need to call some laws reasonable laws and some laws dictatorship laws that make no sense? Or dictates. Is that a word? Dictates? Yeah. And if there is a difference between the two, why does God need to teach us the reasonable laws? We're reasonable people. We could have come up with them on our own. So this is the question that we've been discussing. And here we have our answer. Morals and ethics must be absolute. And the Rebbe is going to go on to explain. I'm first going to quote Germany because the Rebbe is going to talk about a different part of Germany. Germany after the war. But I'm going to talk about Germany before the war. Was there any country that was more sophisticated than Germany at the time in terms of their doctors and scientists? They were top of the line. And maybe Russia had better scientists. But Russia at the time, they were extremely, Germany, thank you. Germany were extremely structured people, extremely, what's the word? Yeah, but they were very, they prided themselves on their accomplishments in the fields of science and medicine. How is it possible that such people could commit such heinous crimes?
The scientists weren't running the government.
The scientists weren't running the government, but where was their moral compass when it came to, you know what? We don't have to look so far back. Today, you have a bunch of kids running around cursing out the Jews. How is that possible? We're people just like anyone else.
Social media.
Because they're being fed garbage. And when you're being fed garbage, if I were to believe all the stuff that these kids are reading, I would also hate the Jews.
TikTok, social media.
It's very easy to corrupt people. And once you determine that the Jew is the source of all of your problems, well, then self-defense comes along. You do what you got to do. So that's one argument which is often brought up. These doctors and scientists themselves were, unfortunately involved in. They didn't rebel. They didn't run away. A lot of them put on the uniform. But we're going to look at something else. What happened? Page number 6, morals and ethics must be absolute. The explanation of this, albeit briefly, is as follows. The purpose of any intellectual matter is that it should not remain only in the realm of thought, but should also be carried into actual behavior. Study is meant to lead to action, meaning that the way a person acts in practice should follow the dictates of logic. This is why we need a commandment in Torah. Without it, there can be obstructions that prevent what is understood intellectually from being carried out in practice, due to the interference of various side considerations. First and foremost among these is the concept of bribery. As the verse states, bribery blinds the wise and distorts the words of the righteous. The Torah of truth itself calls such a person wise and righteous. We're not talking about a case of someone who knows the truth, nevertheless acts against it. We're not dealing with wicked people here. Rather, bribery blinds people's eyes so that they are incapable of seeing the matter as it truly is, and instead develop a different understanding of it. For example, let's say the correct thing would have been for them to bomb Kanoa, was the city? Kyoto. Let's say the correct military decision would have been to blow it. This guy who was there, who saw the beauty, now is being strongly moved in his decision by the beauty of the structures that he saw in Kyoto. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that this is factually what the people that we know. You know what they say about the difference between a Jewish anti-Semite and a non-Jewish anti-Semite? A Jewish anti-Semite says, "I love all the Jewish people. My neighbor Moshe, he's a scammer. My the rabbi, oh, he's a piece of work. The gabbai, he's even worse." A non-Jewish anti-Semite says, "All Jews are horrible. What about your doctor? Oh, he's the best. And your lawyer, couldn't get better."
Hitler admired his Jewish doctor who on his mother's cancer, treated his mother's cancer, and kept her alive as long as they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we see things differently based on our perception of the world and based on what's going on. And it's not the bribery here, it's not that you're doing something wrong necessarily, but it's that your outlook gets strongly influenced based on the way you approach things and based on what you've seen and the information you've been given. In other words, since this is a wise and intellectually capable person, sorry, I'm going to add one more. There's a judge, gets up, and he looks at the plaintiff and says, "I don't understand this. What kind of a chutzpah? From you I received a check of $10,000 to sway the case towards you." He looks at the defendant and he says to the lawyer, "What kind of a chutzpah? From you I received a check of $15,000 to sway the case in your favor. Can't believe this is happening in my court. I've decided that the only just way forward is to issue a check of $5,000 to the defendants, and now we can judge the case on its merit." Okay, back towards the bottom of page number 6. In other words, since this is a wise and intellectually capable person, there is no reason for his intellect itself to change. And indeed, his intellect does not change. The effect of bribery is that the person doesn't perceive the situation properly. It's not that he's trying to skew the situation and trying to come up with reasons why, even though he understands the truth to be different, he is going to give an answer that reflects what the other person wants to hear. His pursuit of truth itself will be skewed. They see an opening, but they don't know whether it is a door leading to a good place or the opening of a pit into which they may fall. Continuing page number 7, a New Germany. This was in the year of 1952. Everyone remembers that year very well. There is no need for elaborate explanations regarding this point because we have seen this openly in our own times. There was a nation which for many years was renowned and prided itself on excelling especially in intellect and science, philosophy and ethics. Precisely that nation used intellect and science for acts of cruelty against Jews in a manner completely opposed to basic humanity in the worst way possible, unlike anything found among other nations. To this very day, they do not express remorse for this. Now, I'm going to read a little bit. Most of you remember this or learned about it, but I'm going to read it from here. The Rebbe was addressing an issue that was among the most charged and painful in the years following the Holocaust, the relationship of the Jewish people with Germany. Immediately after the war, there was a broad consensus in the Jewish world and in the young state of Israel for a complete boycott of Germany. The leadership of the Yishuv and the state advocated a total severance of all contact with Germany. In the first 4 years after the establishment of the state, Israeli passport even said that it was valid for all countries of the world except Germany. On September 10, this is not in your copies here. On September 10, 1952, the reparations agreement was signed between the state of Israel and West Germany. According to the agreement, Germany committed to pay Israel approximately 3 billion marks as compensation for the Jewish property that had been looted and for the suffering caused during the Holocaust. The purpose of the agreement was to help rehabilitate Holocaust survivors and build the Israeli economy. But it sparked an especially fierce public controversy, among the most stormy the state had known in its early years. Opposition to the agreement, led by Menachem Begin and the Cherut movement, viewed the reparations money as blood money and a desecration of the honor of the murdered, arguing that it was unacceptable to accept financial compensation from the killers. Slogans such as the Yellow Star, a badge of honor, reparations and negotiations, a disgrace for generations, expressed the depth of the pain and anger. On the other hand, David Ben-Gurion and Mapai government supported the agreement, understanding it as an existential and economic necessity for the young state of Israel, and believing that the funds would in practice assist survivors. The debate did not remain only on a theoretical level. Leaders such as Menachem Begin called for a rebellion. Dov Shalansky, who later became Speaker of the Knesset, attempted to plant an explosive device in the foreign ministry. And stormy demonstrations took place in the streets, in which some protesters even wore yellow stars. At the same time, difficult and charged debates were held in the Knesset. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt over here. Hope it's okay for me to repeat this. There was a guy who was interviewing an older man who had survived. He's a Holocaust survivor, and they were talking about how did it work, matchmaking in those days. And he asks the older gentleman, was it easier? Was finding a shidduch, was finding a bashert easier in those days, or is it easier now? He said it was much easier then. He said, why? The old man said, because nobody had parents to oppose. In the late 1950s, security ties were also formed between Israel and Germany, including arms deals and exchanges of intelligence. These connections were initially kept secret and were revealed to the public only at a later stage. Against this background, certain individuals approached the Rebbe and asked his opinion. Was it appropriate for a Jew to accept reparations money from Germany? It's a good question. The Rebbe replied that this is not a religious question. This is first and foremost a moral question. In practice, once the agreement had already been signed and the state of Israel and Jewish organizations around the world were receiving the reparations, an individual's refusal to accept the funds would not change the overall reality. Therefore, in the existing situation, it was worthwhile to accept the reparations, if only because doing so takes the stolen goods out of the hands of the thief. In other words, the Rebbe said this is a great moral question that we're not going to get into because the papers have already been signed, so it doesn't matter. What matters now is if there are funds available to help you get back on your feet, there are funds available to help take money away from the thieves, then go for it. The signing of the reparations agreements and the ties that developed in its wake ultimately also led to the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between Israel and Germany. This reminds me of an interesting, we won't go into the back and forth of it now, but something to mull over in your head. There's a big question about insurance. Insurance was created that if you have a problem, you should be able to fix it. Home insurance, right? Now what happens is a guy gets a little leak in his roof and all of a sudden he has a $200,000 check from insurance and renovates the entire house. So you have people who are gaming the system, getting full renovations of their house, and now insurance premiums go up for everyone because insurance can't afford to pay out anymore.
But wait a minute.
And then
The insurance companies have their own adjusters. They're gonna.
I don't know exactly how it works. I'm just talking about word that you hear on the street.
Yeah, but their adjusters are their
They're part of the game.
It's the softball.
They're
It's
they're
the
part
low ball.
the low boy, and then you have
Yeah.
someone else who fights, and
Right,
I
that's,
mean that's a whole game, and you look more and you so the question is, say you have a claim, say you have a potential claim, right? Your roof was damaged by a hurricane. You have rights to a claim. Do you try and get the maximum you can from insurance, or do you fix the problem and move on? So on the one hand, one person would say, well, because everybody is messing this up, it's ruining it for everyone because everybody's doing this. So I don't want to do that. And on the other hand, you have people who say, okay, well, this is the way the system is. Are you going to take advantage of it or not? It's something that's available to you. It's funds that are available to you. Maybe you should go ahead and take it because what your personal decision isn't going to be the one to make it or break it. And if they want to make big rules to change things,
And it
then
doesn't-
if you've been paying a premium all along, I mean,
Yeah.
why pay the premium if you're not gonna cash in when you need it?
And
exactly.
besides, it doesn't really. Anybody, I mean, they're still big. Billions and billions of dollars a year, I mean.
Yeah.
It doesn't
So
raise.
these are it's like the whole. So these are
They even
interesting.
They even insure each other.
That's interesting. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the 1972 Olympic Games. Were held in Munich. The state of Israel sent representatives to participate in the competitions. And about this, the Rebbe did not remain silent. Let's look at source number 5. Page number 7, source number 5. Chaim Lucas, would you like to read?
Where are we? This event occurred in Germany where 6 million Jews were killed by those claiming to be a superior nation. Why go there and participate and celebrate with them and try to curry favor with them and demonstrate a friendly relationship despite knowing that they openly hate Jews? At the very least, they should have skipped this year's Olympics. One could argue that in the immediate post-war period, there was a need to maintain relations with Germany in order to receive reparations. But for this, there is no justification.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, the Rebbe's words rang true. As we all know, in that year, on the 11th of Elul, on September 5, 1972, terrorists murdered 11 members of the Israeli Olympic delegation, athletes and coaches, on German soil.
But they weren't German.
They weren't German terrorists, but if the Jews would not have been there, it would not have happened.
So they would have got them somewhere else.
Okay, but look what happened next. After the murders, a brief memorial ceremony was held, and after only about a day, the International Olympic Committee decided to resume the Games. Despite the profound shock, the Olympics continued almost as usual under the chilling slogan, "The Games must go on." Who cares? 11 Jews died? That's fine. The Games must go on.
Well, that's because the head of the Olympics was an anti-Semite racist bastard. They named his president.
Exactly. The choice to quickly return to routine, specifically in Germany, and in the shadow of the still fresh and painful memory of the Holocaust, was perceived as an expression of moral insensitivity and as a desecration of the memory of the murdered. In this talk, the Rebbe explains that the position claiming it is supposedly a different Germany, and therefore should be treated with affection and friendship, even to the point of participating in the Olympics held on its soil, is a flawed approach rooted in bribery. When money, benefits, or honor are received, even if presented under the guise of political or sporting interests, judgment becomes distorted. Bribery blinds the eyes of the wise and causes honest people to stop seeing reality as it truly is. Instead of clear moral vision, self-justification develops, blurred boundaries, deliberate forgetting, and an attempt to artificially separate the past from the present. Let's continue on page number 8. And yet, there are those who plead in every possible way to be allowed to go to them and to cooperate with them, not only with regard to the purchase of weapons, but also in other areas such as sports, competitions, and the like. This is out of a desire to be like all other nations, like all the nations, the house of Israel, God forbid. Moreover, even after suffering the consequences once, they return and try again. This is in addition to the general principle that it is an established rule that Esau hates Jacob, as evident even among the best of nations. Despite witnessing the cruel conduct toward the Jewish people described above, they did not protest. Therefore, special caution is required when bringing someone into a sensitive security position. There needs to be an investigation to determine whether they can be relied upon to help protect the Jewish people. and rule out the concern that they might assist the opposing side. At first, they argued that the contemporary people are the very same nation and that the obligation to remember and not forget what they did still applies. But after accepting bribes, they began to claim that now this is a different nation, different Germans, on the contrary to the truth that everyone knows that they have remained as they were. They make this claim only because bribery has completely distorted their judgment. Page number 9. With regard to bribery, there is no greater bribe than a person's own self of self-importance and self-worth, honor and self-love. This can so thoroughly skew a person's reasoning that they are capable of doing things that are the very opposite of logic. So from here, the depth of what the Torah is trying to tell us becomes clear. It's not enough that the laws be understandable to human reason, and that is why the Torah chose to command them as well, giving them divine authority. Such authority does not depend on the spirit of the times, external pressures, or temporary gain, and it is not confused even in the face of one bribe or another, because the morals are not decided by us, but by something greater than ourselves. Page number 10. The lesson we learn from this week's Torah portion, the portion of Mishpatim, is that even Mordechai David's Bar Mitzvah Parsha, is that even with regard to laws that are understood with human logic, the Torah emphasizes that these two were given at Sinai, meaning that they contain an element that transcends reason. At the same time, although these two were given at Sinai, beyond reason, they are nevertheless laws that are intelligible to reason. This is because the Torah demands understanding and intellectual comprehension. Torah is supposed to be understood. As the verse states, it is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the nations. Moreover, intellect is the most precious thing a person possesses, and therefore it must be used in the service of God. Our sages said the world was not worthy to make use of gold. So why was gold created? For the temple. Similarly, the world was not worthy to make use of intellect. It was given only for understanding and comprehending the Torah. It was not given in order to toil intellectually on figuring out how to earn another dollar in order to buy a nicer home or finer possessions. Therefore, we must strive to understand and grasp the Torah to the full extent our intellect allows. But the foundation of this effort is the principle that these two were given at Sinai. This is why the portion of Mishpatim comes after the portion of last week, Yitro, which recounts the giving of the Torah at Sinai and concludes with the section about the altar of earth and the altar of stones. This teaches us that even earth and stones, inanimate materials, can be made into an altar for God. Following this comes the portion of Mishpatim, teaching that we can make an altar for God even out of matters that descend into and are expressed through human reason, by connecting them to something that transcends reason. Based on this, we can also understand why the concept that the Jewish people said we will do before they said we will listen and understand appears specifically in this week's portion of Mishpatim and not in last week's portion where we actually received the Torah. At first glance, it seems out of place in Mishpatim, both in terms of chronology and context. Chronologically, the declaration we will do before we will listen was made prior to the giving of the Torah in the previous portion. In terms of content, placing we will do before we will listen would seem relevant only before they heard it, not after they already heard it. Then we're going to say we will do before we hear. Although it is true that the Torah is not bound by chronological order, this does not mean that the Torah was written in an orderless manner. As the Shalah of blessed memory writes, any departure from chronological order requires a reason and an explanation, page 12. The reason for the appearance of we will do and we will listen in this week's Torah portion is that the Torah wishes to emphasize that even in matters that are understood by human reason, we must do before we listen. We do what God wants of us even if we don't yet understand it, and then we make sure that we understand it. This is the meaning of our sages' teaching. Do not sit and weigh the commandments of the Torah against each other. At first glance, with regard to laws that are understandable by reason, there would be room to reason that it is worthwhile to give up a lighter matter in order to gain a more weightier one. Therefore, the Torah emphasizes that the lightest of the light is like the most serious of the serious, even though the Torah itself describes one as light and the other as serious. In summary, The Torah places the declaration we will do and we will listen at the end of this week's Torah portion, even though historically it was said before the giving of the Torah. There are three types of commandments: commandments that are chukim, beyond reason, eidos, reminders of events which are understandable by reason, and mishpatim, logical and rational commandments. The Torah emphasizes that even rational laws such as civil and guardian laws obligate us not because of our reasoning, but because of the divine command from Sinai. Human reason, no matter how wise, is not a guarantee of consistent morality, since it operates within a reality influenced by personal inclination. Page 13. The historical lesson from Germany after the Holocaust: interest in budgets and honor caused blurred boundaries in the Jewish relationship toward Germany. Initially, everyone said, remember and do not forget, but very soon after, they began to claim it was a different nation. The combination of faith and understanding. The Torah does not cancel reason, but gives it a foundation. First, acceptance of authority. We told Hashem that we will do, and only afterward, deep rational understanding, we will listen. We will do and we will listen is written after the reading of this week's Torah portion of all the laws, Mishpatim, to teach us that precisely in areas where reason understands, we most need the anchor of acceptance so that truth never bends.
In Israel, be using the German submarines or not?
They're using them now.
They-
So one interesting point is that when it comes to actual arms, you can make a claim that this is saving lives, right? We need weapons in order to survive, so it doesn't matter where we get them from. If our enemies will arm us, so long as they're not messing with the components and giving us bad things,
like the submarine.
then you're right. We'll use. They know how to make them airtight. Sorry.
To the Ford factor.
Bad joke, but it was a good one. L'chaim, everyone. Next Shabbat morning we'll be here 10 a.m. Next week, Tuesday, we will not have class. Tuesday morning we will not have class, but next week, Wednesday, we should be back on.
Basically, by just the hull. They put in their own.
They put in their
electronics.
own electronic systems.
Yeah, it's there. You know,
Yeah. Way
startup
ahead.
nation, yeah, way ahead.
Okay, thank you, Joan and Susie, for joining. Thank you, Chaim and Chaim, for joining. Thank you, Mordechai David and Zalman and Baruch.